Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Imagine your HOA removing no trespassing signs from your own land, and then having the audacity to fine you for putting them up. They called me difficult and hostile for wanting privacy on property I legally owned, so I set a little trap, and the person I caught red-handed, you will not believe who it was. I need to preface this by saying I am not a confrontational person. I don't go looking for problems, I don't enjoy drama, and I really don't care what my neighbors do with their time as long as it doesn't affect me. I keep my lawn mowed, my fence line clean, and my business to myself. So when I tell you what I went through with my HOA, understand that every single step I took was after being pushed into a corner. We bought our house about 2.5 years ago. The property is a flag lot, which is a type of layout where the house sits back from the road and a long, narrow strip of land connects it to the street. If you've never seen one, picture a flag on a flagpole. The flag part is the main lot where the house sits, and the pole is that long stretch of land leading up to it. Ours is about 15 feet wide and runs about 90 feet from the sidewalk to where the actual yard starts. When we were looking at properties, our realtor was up front about what a flag lot means. That strip is private property. It's on the deed. You own it just like you own the backyard. The fact that it's long and skinny and runs alongside other people's yards doesn't change what it is legally. We did our due diligence, had a real estate attorney review the title, confirmed the plat, and signed on the dotted line, fully understanding what we were buying. What we didn't fully appreciate at the time was what the strip looked like from the outside. The previous owner had lived in the house for something like 25 or 30 years before selling. He was older, retired, and from what neighbors told us after we moved in, a very generous and easygoing man. Somewhere along the way, he had apparently started letting people cut through his strip of land as a shortcut to get to the park and the cluster of shops about a quarter-mile away. People started using it, then more people used it. Then it became just a thing people did, as naturally as breathing. By the time he sold to us, the strip had a worn path down the middle of it from foot traffic, and neighbors thought of it as a sort of informal public path. None of that has any legal weight whatsoever. The man never filed an easement, never recorded anything with the county, never granted formal permission that could transfer to new owners. People using land without permission doesn't make it theirs. But try explaining that to people who've been doing something for years and never been told otherwise. We found out about the foot traffic pretty quickly after moving in. The first week, we looked out the front window and saw a woman walking her dog right down the middle of our strip like she was on a public sidewalk. Her dog picked a spot about 20 feet from our porch and did its business, and she pulled out a bag, picked it up, and just kept walking. No acknowledgement of us watching through the glass, no hesitation, just total ownership of the space. The next day, same thing, different neighbor, a couple jogging together, cut right through the strip without even glancing at the house. Then a guy on a bicycle. Then a mom with a stroller. It was like we didn't exist. I put up with it for about 6 weeks, hoping it would taper off on its own, or that people would figure out there were new owners who weren't the previous guy or something. It didn't taper. It was consistent every single day, sometimes a dozen people, sometimes more on weekends. My wife and I talked it over and decided the cleanest solution was signs. Not aggressive, not rude, just clear. I ordered 4 signs online, the kind that meet state code requirements for property notices, with the proper wording, the right size lettering, the whole thing. I installed them at the entrance to the strip and at intervals along it. They said private property / no trespassing, and that was that. For about 2 days, the foot traffic slowed. A few people stopped at the entrance, read the sign, and turned around. Progress. On the morning of the 3rd day, I walked out and the signs were gone. Not knocked over, not damaged. Gone. I walked the whole strip and found 2 of them tossed into the shrubs along the edge and one near a utility box a few feet off the path. The 4th one I couldn't find at all. Someone had physically removed them and discarded them. I'll be honest, my first reaction was that it was just random. Maybe kids messing around, maybe someone who used the path regularly and didn't like being told no. I went back to the store, bought replacements, put them up, and that time around I made note of the exact date and time I installed them. They were gone again within 48 hours. That's when I had a conversation with the HOA board secretary. I was out in the yard when she came walking down the sidewalk and slowed to a stop at the entrance to the strip. She introduced herself and said she'd been wanting to talk to me. She told me the signs I'd put up were causing problems. People were upset, the path had always been open, and the board was hearing complaints. I told her the path ran through private property and I had every right to post signs. She said the board considered the strip a community thoroughfare and that my signs didn't reflect the spirit of the neighborhood. She kept using words like community and spirit and openness. When I asked her to point me to the specific bylaw that gave the HOA authority over private property not listed as common area, she shifted topics. She said the board had discussed it and decided the signs needed to come down. I asked her if the board had a deed showing the strip belonged to them. She said things didn't always work that way and that established usage had its own kind of validity. I told her established usage without a recorded easement has no legal validity, and I needed her to show me the deed or stop the conversation. She told me I was being unnecessarily difficult and walked off. I drove to my local hardware store and bought 2 battery-operated trail cameras, good quality ones with night vision and motion activation. I mounted them in spots along the strip where they weren't obvious, aimed them so they'd capture anyone walking through, and then reinstalled the signs. This time I also made sure the signs were properly compliant with state code. I looked up the actual statute, confirmed the required dimensions, confirmed the wording, and confirmed the installation height. If someone was going to try to argue the signs were improper, I wanted that door shut. While I was waiting for the cameras to collect footage, I started getting more organized about the whole situation. I pulled out my original closing documents and reread the title report. I looked up my property record on the county assessor's website. The strip was clearly documented as part of my parcel. There was no easement on file, no right-of-way recorded, nothing. The land was mine, clean and simple with no encumbrances. Whatever this neighborhood had been doing for years, they'd been doing it on someone else's property without ever making it legal. A couple days after reinstalling the signs, I had my answer. The cameras had picked up a lot of footage. Neighbors using the path despite the signs, which was annoying but expected. But what made me stop cold was one specific clip from about 9 in the evening. The HOA president walked onto my property, looked around to check if anyone was watching, pulled a short crowbar from a bag he was carrying, and pried my signposts right out of the ground. He took them with him and walked back off the property. I watched that clip 4 times. The man who was supposed to be running the homeowners association for our neighborhood had personally trespassed onto my private property and stolen my legally posted signs. I didn't do anything immediately. I backed up that footage to 2 separate locations and made note of the timestamp and everything visible in the clip. Then I went and talked to a friend of mine who works as a paralegal to get a sense of what I was actually looking at. She told me that what she saw in that video, if it happened on a properly deeded private property, could constitute criminal trespass, theft, and destruction of property, depending on the value and circumstances. She wasn't giving me legal advice formally, but she said it was worth talking to an actual attorney. Before I did anything else, I went to the county assessor's office. I told them I wanted certified, stamped copies of my plat map and the original land survey. They were helpful, and I left with official documents showing exactly where my property lines were, including the full extent of the strip. It was all right there in black and white, recorded and verified. I also hired a professional surveyor to come out and reestablish my property line markers. He drove bright pink survey stakes into the ground at every corner and along the strip, and where required, he installed permanent metal markers. The surveyor was matter-of-fact about the whole thing. He walked the property, cross-referenced his equipment readings with the recorded plat, and told me the boundaries were exactly as described in the deed. He said cases like this came up more often than people thought, where land with unusual shapes got treated as public space just because nobody had complained before. When he was done, there was zero ambiguity about what was mine. Anyone who wanted to claim otherwise would be arguing against stamped government documents and physical survey markers. That same week, the HOA had the audacity to deliver a formal notice of violation to my door. It stated that my signs were in violation of the HOA's community standards, described them as an eyesore, claimed they were creating a hostile atmosphere, and included a fine of $200. There was a notice number at the top and a deadline for response. I stared at that notice for a while. $200 for posting legal signs on my own land, on land that someone on that same board had personally trespassed onto with a crowbar 2 weeks earlier. Then I did something that I think confused them because it wasn't what they expected. I didn't argue about the fine, I didn't call them up yelling. I wrote a short, cold response addressed to the full board, signed my name, and kept it to 3 paragraphs. I noted that my signs had been removed from my private property. I invited the board to provide me with documentation showing that the strip of land was designated HOA, common area, because if it was, they would have a deed showing it. I stated that if they could not provide such documentation, I expected all foot traffic through the area to cease immediately, and I expected my notices to be treated as legally valid. I kept the video footage out of it entirely. I just put the question of ownership on the table and waited. Their response was to announce an emergency board meeting. I found out about it through a general notice that went to all homeowners. The stated reason for the emergency meeting was to discuss unauthorized modifications to community common areas and to address a homeowner who was creating conflict and disrupting community access. They were talking about me, about my own land. I called around and confirmed the meeting details. It was open to all residents. I said I'd be there. I spent the days leading up to the meeting doing my homework. I printed out the certified plat map, had it mounted on foam boards so it was easy to display. I put together everything I needed on my laptop, including the trail cam footage. I made sure the footage was trimmed and clear, that the timestamp was visible, and that the video quality was good enough that a room full of people could identify who they were watching. I also prepared a brief written summary of the property ownership chain, the date I installed each set of signs, the dates they were removed, and the timeline of HOA communications. I didn't tell anyone what I had, I just showed up. The meeting was held in the common room of the clubhouse. About 40 or 50 neighbors showed up, which told me plenty of people had opinions about this. The board sat at a folding table at the front. The HOA president was there, looking very comfortable and very sure of himself. The secretary sat beside him with a notepad. A few other board members filled out the row. The president opened by saying that the board had called the meeting because a homeowner had installed signage on what the board considered a community thoroughfare, and that this had created confusion and animosity among residents who relied on the path for daily use. He said the board had been acting in the best interests of the whole community and wanted to give everyone a chance to speak. Several neighbors went up and talked about how long they'd been using the path, how it was essential to getting to the park, how the previous owner had always been welcoming. A few of them looked at me while they spoke. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. When it was my turn, I stood up, introduced myself, and said I had a few things I wanted to share before the board moved forward with any decisions. The president said I was welcome to speak briefly. I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector that was already set up in the room, and pulled up the plat map. I walked them through it slowly. I showed the property boundaries, explained what a flag lot is, and pointed to the strip. I told them it was listed on my deed, purchased by me as private property and confirmed by both the county assessor's records and a professional survey I'd had done. I held up the certified copies. A few people in the audience started murmuring. Then I asked the president directly whether the board had a deed showing that strip was HOA common area. He shifted in his seat and said the board had always considered it part of the community's historical access, and that formal deeds weren't necessarily required for established community use. I said that was interesting because established community use isn't a legal standard that overrides property ownership. I kept my voice even. I wasn't there to perform, I was there to make a clear record. Then I said I had one more thing. I pulled up the trail cam footage. The room went very quiet when the timestamp appeared on the screen. Then people started recognizing the figure in the video. Someone near the back said the president's name out loud, almost like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The footage was clear, well lit enough from the nearby streetlight, and unmistakably showed the board president prying my signs out of the ground, looking around to check if anyone was watching, and walking away with them. The secretary put her pen down. One of the board members visibly leaned back in his chair. The president started to say something about context and misunderstanding, but I was already talking. I said that I had two options. The first was to file a police report for criminal trespass, theft, and destruction of property, take the footage and the certified property documents to the county, and let that process run its course. The second was to resolve this tonight among ourselves, without involving law enforcement. I laid out what the second option looked like. The HOA would cover the full cost of installing a proper fence along the property line of the strip, separating it from the neighboring yards and closing off the foot traffic completely. Professional installation, materials included. The fine that had been issued to me would be voided, and the president would step down from the board before the end of the month. In return, I would not file a police report, would not pursue a civil claim, and would consider the matter closed. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then the president said he'd need to consult with the board's attorney. I said that was fine and gave them 1 week. I closed my laptop, picked up my printed documents, and sat back down. A few people near me in the audience were looking at me differently than they had been an hour before. One man 2 rows back leaned over and said something to his wife. I didn't hear what it was. The meeting ended without any vote, without any resolution, without the board achieving whatever outcome they'd originally planned. The president wrapped things up quickly and thanked everyone for coming, which under the circumstances was almost funny. People filed out, and a few of them stopped to talk to me in the parking lot afterward. One couple, who I recognized as living 2 houses down from the strip, said they had no idea the land was private. They said they assumed it was always a public path and they felt bad about it. That was fine. Most people hadn't known. The problem was never the regular neighbors, it was the person who decided it was acceptable to take a crowbar to my signs. A woman I didn't recognize came over and introduced herself as someone who had been on the board about 3 years earlier and had stepped down over disagreements with the current president. She didn't say much, just that she was glad someone had finally pushed back and that she'd seen this kind of behavior from him before when residents raised issues he didn't agree with. She wished me luck and went to her car. I drove home that night feeling steadier than I had in weeks. Whatever happened next, I had done everything right. I had the documents, I had the footage, I had followed every proper channel before escalating, and I had made my case in front of the entire community. If they chose to fight it, they'd be fighting from a very bad position. The attorney must have told them pretty clearly what the footage meant for their position, because within 4 days I had a written response from the board. They agreed to all 3 terms. The fine was rescinded in writing. The president submitted his resignation to the board at the end of that week, citing personal reasons, and the HOA put out bids for the fence installation. It took them another 2 weeks to select a contractor and finalize the scope of the project. I was kept in the loop because the fence was going on the edge of my property, which meant they needed my input on placement. The contractor was professional, and the board's representative who showed up to the walkthrough could barely make eye contact with me, which I wasn't going to comment on. We confirmed the line against my survey stakes, agreed on the panel style and height, and set a start date. The fence went up about 6 weeks later. Cedar posts, solid panels, runs the full length of the strip on both sides with a locked gate at my end only. It looks clean and it looks permanent. The work crew was out there for 3 days total. On the second day, a woman from the neighborhood stopped on the sidewalk and watched them work for a while. She eventually came over and asked me if it was really necessary to block off the whole path. I told her it was private property and I had every right to fence it. She said she understood that legally, but didn't I think it was a little much given that people had been using it for years. I told her that years of use doesn't create a right, and that if the HOA had handled this reasonably from the start instead of removing my signs, none of this would have escalated the way it did. She didn't have much to say to that. On the third day the crew finished, I walked the full perimeter of the strip with the contractor to do a final inspection. Every post was solid, every panel was flush, the gate latch was clean. It was exactly what I'd asked for. The shortcut is gone. The path that people had been using for years now dead ends at a wooden fence that isn't going anywhere. If you want to get to the park from the far end of the neighborhood, you walk around the block. It adds about 5 minutes to the trip. I installed new signs inside the fence visible through the slats. They're bigger than the originals. They say, "Private property, monitored by 24-hour video surveillance. Thank you for respecting the boundary." I kept the trail cameras up too. Upgraded them, actually, to a newer model that sends motion alerts to my phone. In the first month after the fence went up, the cameras caught 2 separate incidents of people trying to look through the fence slats and one person who actually tried the gate latch before walking away. The cameras got all of it. Nothing has happened since. I figure at this point the word is out that the property is monitored and people have made their peace with the longer walk. I see former neighbors in passing sometimes. Most of them have accepted it. A couple of them never made eye contact with me again, which is fine. I didn't move here to make friends, I moved here because I liked the house. I ran into the board secretary at the grocery store about a month after the fence went up. We were in the same aisle and she looked like she wanted to move to a different section, but the store was busy and she was stuck. I nodded at her. She gave a short nod back. That was the extent of it. I'm not interested in relitigating anything with anyone. I got what was fair and I'm done with it. There's a new board president now. I got the notice in the mail, as all homeowners do. From what I can tell through the general meeting summaries the HOA distributes, the new leadership is mostly focused on normal things like landscaping contracts and the pool maintenance schedule. Nobody has mentioned the strip of land again. The one thing I still get some satisfaction from, and I'll be honest about that, is watching the former board president walk his dog. His house is on the far side of the development. Every single day he has to walk the long way around the block to get to the park because the shortcut is gone. Sometimes I see him from my front yard making that loop, and I notice he glances over at the fence every time he passes the corner where the strip meets the street. It's a fence he helped pay for, on land he was never entitled to. That feels about right. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in the early 2000s, I was a concrete mixer driver. Mostly I drove a front mixer, which means the high end of the barrel and the opening is in the front, because the driver has so much control over the concrete pouring operation. While I pour, I can start / stop control the flow. I sit rather high so I can better see the job site. I can also easily move the truck while pouring, and I can hydraulically move the chute left, right, up, and down. So they are more desired. Mostly because the crew receiving the load can use less people than with a cheaper rear truck. Keep in mind the concrete load is batched in the plant and loaded in the truck straight away for delivery. As the ingredients start to harden, the mix heats up. The longer the mix is in the truck, the more the concrete heats up and starts to set. 2 ways to slow this down is to slow the rotation to the slowest speed, reducing friction, and add water to cool the load. Typically, you want to pour the load within an hour of being batched. One day I poured a job and ended up with about 4 cubic yards of concrete left over. Normally I would take this back to the yard and pour it in large block forms to make large 1 cubic yard interlocking blocks to be sold for retaining walls. However, this day there was a contractor close by where I was that needed a little more concrete to finish a basement floor in a new construction home. Great, thanks dispatch. We have a truck not too far away from you with extra concrete that we will sell you at a discount. Contractor agrees because it saves him money and he does not have to wait. So I head there. Once on site, I set up really quick, check my load, and add water as needed to get a good flow. I pour for a little bit and the contractor asks for more water. Here's the thing, my load is over 2 hours old right now and it is heating up fast. It needs more water, more often, to remain fluid. The water evaporates out quickly and the concrete gets thicker. Each of our trucks carry 300 gallons of water used for the concrete and cleaning the truck when done. Under the water tank there is a main shutoff valve. Below that is a pipe that runs to the cab, with another valve, then up to the barrel to water the load. 2 more valves for the upper and lower water hoses and 1 more for a drain to the ground. All these except for the barrel valve are located outside the truck behind the cab. The contractor gets angry that I have to stop often to add water. Remember, the load is old by concrete standards. As a concrete contractor, he should know that. He comes up to me and says, "Open the barrel valve and add water." Nowhere near that nice. Then he says, "Do not touch that valve again. Leave it open and I will control the water." Again, nowhere near that nice. Now mix that up and start pouring. What he is doing is shutting off the main valve from the outside when he decides there is enough water. Malicious compliance. He comes out 2 more times and adds water. Finally, as they get close to being done, some of the extra guys on the crew come up, open the main valve, grab my hose, and start washing their tools. Because they open the main valve, they are also adding water to the barrel. Now, I am not to touch the barrel valve, so I don't say a word. I don't touch the valve. The barrel line dumps 1 gallon of water per second. Just over a minute later, about 70 gallons of water rush down the chute and in the basement. The contractor comes out of the basement screaming, comes up to me and he says, "What is your problem?" I said, "I don't have a problem. The problem is you thought you could do my job and yours and you can't. Now you have a problem." As I finished cleaning the truck, he was calling every number for my company to complain. When I got back to the yard, the plant manager wanted to know what happened. After I explained the situation, I found out the company as a whole has had an issue with this contractor. I never heard anything about it, nor did I ever see that contractor again. The next one is an entitled people story. I've spoke a lot about my sister here. But my bad aunt is pretty entitled too. Since I have two aunts, I tend to refer about them as the good aunt and bad aunt. As for my bad aunt, she's been married and divorced 3 times, has lost multiple houses, and is one of the few people to ever make my grandpa genuinely angry. When my mother was growing up, she was the middle child. Her elder sister was the favorite, and her younger sister was the baby. My grandparents, sadly until recent years, were somehow blind to their favoritism, and about a week ago my mother let them have it, so they can't deny it anymore. My bad aunt is very much like a predecessor to my sister, guilty of many of the same things, but her life is not one I'm very well versed in because my mother worked to shield me from her bad sister all my life. But some things still slipped through the cracks. For instance, during the 2000 New Year's party to welcome the new millennium, my bad aunt decided to show up at my parents' new house with a bunch of people that were not invited. My mother caught these people trying to go through her stuff and had a huge fight with her bad sister before kicking her out. And my bad aunt, I think, yelled something about my mother not deserving the house, and she hopes she loses it. It was all downhill from there. Much like my sister, my aunt is guilty of infidelity and sleeping with teenage boys. She had a 16-year-old, I think, named Tim, crashing with her in the 90s. That guy was way too proud of the fact he could karate chop a board in half. My bad aunt's first husband was actually a good guy, or so I'm told. I barely remember the man, can't even remember his name. All I can remember is flannel shirts and a mustache. My bad aunt's second husband was 8 years her junior. And frankly, the guy was and still is somewhat obsessed with her. He was crazy, he was self-taught in fixing things. But he left a lot of projects unfinished, would fly off the handle for no reason, was terrible with kids, and was just generally very confrontational. Him and my aunt bought a house together once. It was a pretty old one, and I can't remember where it was because I only went there once. But while in the backyard, I noticed some planks covering a square area, and since the house was so old, I asked if it was an old well. He immediately went off on me and ranted about how if it was a well, he'd have to pay an astronomical amount to fill it in, and wells aren't allowed in cities, etc. I was just a naive country kid, I didn't know, but apparently it was the remains of an old hot tub. Thankfully, my bad aunt divorced that man. But about 4 years ago, he swung by looking for her. Then there's my bad aunt's third husband. I never really hated the guy. Disliked, sure. But it felt like he just got a lot of hate for his past. He was a part of a rehabilitation program for drug addicts and ex-cons my grandparents used to be involved with. And my bad aunt convinced him to elope with her. At the time, my grandparents had just bought a property for her to move on. And my grandpa, that was literally the first time I can ever actually recall seeing him genuinely mad. He said they didn't buy a property for my aunt just so she could take that guy and elope. My grandparents ended up clearing and reselling the property for a profit, and my bad aunt along with her third husband lived in their basement for like 7 years. The whole time she was henpecking the man, and even once forced him to walk around wearing an anime shirt she found in a random box at an auction. Then my grandparents bought a second property way out in desert nowhere 8 hours away, and that's where they put my bad aunt and her husband, number 3. About the time my bad aunt turned 60, her looks changed really bad. She was the kind of person who stays good looking up till their late 50s, and then suddenly it looks like a truck hit them. And now she resembles my grandmother. But even despite that, my mother believes her sister still had an affair. Like, who would she have an affair with out in the middle of nowhere? But she apparently sent her husband away for a while so he could do it. The guy ended up going nuts. He broke into my grandparents' house so he could crash in the basement while they were away. He broke into the trailer my sister left the family to pay off and left candy wrappers all over it, and my bad aunt filed for divorce when he got back. Don't know where the guy is now, but it's not really my problem. As for my bad aunt's supposed affair, we believe it was with her second ex-husband, because he's over there. My grandma tried to sigh he was a handyman crashing in their second house's basement. But no, it's my bad aunt's crazy second ex-husband, and now my entitled sister has to be around both my bad aunt and him. Can't really say I feel sorry for her, though. Not after what she put us through. My mother was very traumatized by her older sister when they were kids. And my bad aunt apparently did something so bad to her my mother won't even say what it was. Just mentioning it once made her start crying, and that was just her saying that her sister had done something to her, and she just couldn't go into detail after that. Either way, my bad aunt has been a scar on the family a long time. She's so bad that my mother and good aunt refuse to be around her for any reason. Because of that, my grandparents have to have separate Christmas parties in different places, and soon my sister may be just as unwelcome. Currently, my bad aunt is running the finances of my grandparents' side business, and she's suspected of embezzlement, but they won't do anything about it. When my grandparents pass, she'll be getting that middle-of-nowhere house anyway. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 19F, am a server at a restaurant with a bar in it. The bar side of the restaurant is, of course, 21 plus, and anyone who orders an alcoholic beverage is required to show the waiter their ID. The rest of the restaurant, however, is child-friendly. We were serving breakfast, and I was serving a table of two, a young girl who looked about 8 or 9, and her entitled mother, EM. However, this mom is more than entitled as she will be arrested by the end of this story. I go and take their drink orders after the hostess sits them down. The young girl gets an orange juice while the mother gets a water and mimosa. I, of course, check the mom's ID and see that she's born in the early 80s, so she's good for a mimosa. I let the bartender know that I need a mimosa to serve, and I work on the orange juice for the child and the mother's water. Once I have all 3 drinks, I serve their table and take their meal orders. Everything seems to be going smoothly until I bring back their meals. As I bring back the plates, the mother screams at me. EM, you served my child alcohol! I know for a fact that cannot be true because I'm the one who made the juice and never even went behind the bar where the drinks are. Me, ma'am, you must be mistaken. I didn't put any alcohol in the juice, and I had my eyes on it until it reached your table. EM, well then smell it. She handed me her child's glass, and it did smell like alcohol. Me. Once again, I know that I did not put alcohol in your child's drink. Either someone did it while you weren't looking, or you did it yourself. But the juice had not alcohol before it came to your table. The mom looked at me angrily and demanded to see my manager. EM, I am going to sue you for giving my child alcohol. Bring me your manager. I get the manager, and she gets both mine and the mom's side of the story. Security was even alerted because apparently the child had drunk a few sips of the alcohol. My manager, security, and I went and watched the security footage since both me and the mom swore we didn't put alcohol in the juice. Not only did we discover that I was innocent, we saw the mom as soon as I have placed the glasses down and left, drink half of the child's juice and filled it back up with her mimosa, and then she instructed her child to drink some of it. The mother was arrested for giving her child alcohol and was given a lifetime ban from the restaurant. If she appears again, she will be immediately arrested again. Not how I planned my work morning, but at least it was amusing to watch an EM get what she deserved. Anyway, thank you for watching.